Alright, so this section is all about getting you comfortable with Nuke, especially if you are totally new to compositing or are just a super AE nerd. So no worries, I am taking it slow, acknowledging the request from some of my recent feedback that I was too much of a Speedy Gonzalez. So yes. So, navigating around Nuke is very intuitive because, as mentioned in our previous lesson, Nuke is context sensitive and very easily customizable. Plus, you can always open up another instance of Nuke if you want to follow along a Nuke script tutorial, for example. Unlike After Effects, it will actually not replace your existing work file or open up over your existing work file. It'll create a new one. As you can see, there's 2 instances of Nuke running right now that I have open. Now, Nuke is best done and navigated around with a mouse than a tablet, but both work and I'll show you how to use both. Now, if you're on a Wacom tablet, you just press and hold Alt plus click to move around and pan around in Nuke with a Wacom. And then press and hold the middle mouse button with a mouse to drag and pan around in Nuke. So let's go anti-clockwise here, starting with the top bar. Now the top bar includes very general macro functions, in other words, big boy actions, and is almost easier performed with shortcut keys and hotkeys most of the time. Now the most important drop-down menus you probably have to know is Workspace, Cache, Viewer, and Help. So very briefly, Workspace, as we covered in previous lesson, is basically all about setting an ideal workspace for you. So let's say I want to go to compositing, I'm going back to compositing, I went to scripting, animation, etc, etc. Now Cache is where you actually go and clear up your memory space, so it either allows quicker render or in-software preview and stuff like that. Viewer, you create a new viewer as we've done earlier on, and then Help if you need any additional help in Nuke with keyboard shortcuts, documentation, or even, just checking out the Nukepedia. Now the sidebar here is where all the real tools are at, or aka the effects/nodes. Now Nuke nodes are what you would use to create those effects, so they're kind of like the effects layers in After Effects. Different categories of nodes here exist, and we'll cover this in depth in the next lesson on what each category does. Now the screen is the viewer, obviously, and you can actually import a random image into the scene. And you just hit on the numerical key 1. If you're using the number keypad, make sure that your num lock is turned on. And of course, multiple viewers can be set up as well by hitting CTRLI or looking up the viewer node. So I hit tab, search for viewer, same thing. You can also do this by going up here, viewer, and then you comp viewer. Now the gain and the gamma right here is basically to enhance the view of your image in the viewer. It will actually not affect your render. So if I, let's say, increase the gain right here and increase the gamma, it will not affect my final output, which would still look the same, as you can see in this clip right here. Now, more about this viewer, if you go over to this icon right here, this is the proxy node, and this basically allows you to downsize your current footage. As you can see, my numbers changed here. Just look at that, my number changed. Scale it down to allow you to have a quicker render preview inside Nuke. You can actually adjust these settings. When you go to the Properties tab, hit S to bring up project settings, and you can choose what kind of proxy mode you want to use, whether it's formatting, where you give you a smaller scale format, or use scale, where you 50% scale, which is basically half of this full-size format. As you can see, what I'm doing right now, when I click on this icon, it scales down my footage for the sake of the preview. Now, the other cool thing about Nuke is that it allows you to access a 3D mode as well, and it is very efficient in Nuke. So if I hit tab, you can see I enter immediately into a 3D scene, what you would normally see in 3D software like 3ds Max or Maya. If I hit tab again, I return back to 2D view, tab again, 3D view. So how do I zoom in and zoom out? So basically, if you want to zoom in and zoom out on your viewer or actually on anywhere else, you just hit the plus and minus key. You can also do this in a node graph, plus and minus. And let's say if you want to frame everything up back to its original, you can hit F and you'll frame things up, just like in your node graph, you can hit F. You can also hit the middle mouse button and it will actually do the same thing. It'll frame your viewer or your node graph up to the center. Timeline wise, just hit home and end to go to the first and last frame of your clip. And the arrow keys to go frame by frame. Shift left or right to jump 10 frames ahead or behind. Now let's say if I've made an effect. I'm just going to reset this very quickly. And let's say I've made some effects. So I hit B. I'm just going to blur the crap out of this just so we could see the difference. I want to do some A/B testing. Do I need to create a second viewer and basically just put it side by side like this to do A/B testing? Well, it's not necessary. Because in Nuke, there's this tool that allows you to do A/B testing within this one viewer itself. So if I hit W, and I change this A and B input, basically if I click on my clip, I hit 1 to set the A as 1, and then I go to my blur node, click on it, hit 2, the number 2, in order to allow multiple inputs for my viewer. You can see I already have an instant A/B testing tool set up. Now, for those of you who are really new and this is getting a little bit confusing to you, how come I can use multiple inputs for my viewer? Now you see this thing is very unique to Nuke, where you can actually have multiple input plugs into a single viewer node and you can change them iteratively based on your purpose and use. So multiple inputs into just one single viewer node is possible. And of course, if you just hit 1, 2, 3 and cycle between them, you can see that it changes in the node graph to show you which one you are currently viewing. Now, what if I find that this tool is a little bit annoying and I just want to see the footage itself? You can actually turn this off. This is called overlay, and in Nuke, the shortcut key to turn off the overlay is Q. You can see this little text right here that says my overlay is off. And now you can see that my tool gizmo is completely gone. I'm just going to turn this back on, go back to 1, in which the input is coming from the original clip. Now, node graph basics. How do I bring in effects? What you need to do is basically hit tab, and as we've mentioned in the previous lesson, you have to kind of know what you're looking for, unless you want to scroll through this crazy list. But if not, if you know even the first letter of what you're looking for, let's say grain, you can just hit G, and Nuke will be smart enough to tell you which ones start with G, and you can find and use these in your node graph. You can even hit tab, and it will automatically detect the first one in the list. So let's say I want text. As you see, same thing. If I say H and I want the first one, I just hit tab and it will autocomplete and select the first one in the list. So let's just practice that and bring in a bunch of nodes right now, even if you don't know what they mean, just to get used to the idea. Okay, now let's say it's getting a little bit messy. Right? And then you want to scale this up a little bit so you have more space, but you don't really want to make this smaller in your default screen. So what you can do is enlarge each space. You hit the spacebar key and then middle mouse button click, and you can basically enlarge your working space. Now obviously you scale up the node graph so you can't see anything else, but you actually can do this with any panel or pane that you're currently hovering your mouse over. Okay, moving on, the curve editor for animation. Now we're not actually going to use this that much, but let's say you have a few keyframes. It's kind of like the editor tool in Maya or 3ds Max, where you can basically adjust your curves. Same thing with Dope Sheet, except it's listing it based on keyframes instead of a curve. Okay, so we covered a lot right now in this area, but what about this tab? Now you probably saw a bunch of stuff stacking up whenever I create a new node, and this is normal because what Nuke does is after I create something new, it'll automatically open up the properties in the properties tab to basically say, hey, you have a node here, do something with me. Now you don't want to have to scroll through all these. It gets pretty long and pretty annoying. So you see this number right here. This basically tells you how many in a stack you want to show. So let's say if I set 1, it will only show the most recently selected or recently created node. If I go to 5, and then I double click on a few more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see, we had transform. Now if I hit something else, you can see that transform is gone because the maximum we wanted to show was 5. Of course, it can get pretty chunky and you don't want to waste your time going individually and closing these, right? So what you can do is that you see this little icon right here. Just click on this, or Ctrl-Shift-A, same thing. It shows you the hotkey. I just click on it, it'll delete everything from the Properties tab, but of course not the nodes. So let's just try that again. I go to here, Ctrl-Shift-A, same thing. Clears out my Properties tab. Okay, so that should be about it. A very quick walkthrough, hopefully not too fast so you guys can follow. Now, speaking of nodes, how do we know which to use and when? And how exactly do they work? Well, that's exactly what we will cover in the next lesson.